All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wanda Coleman Theater. Yes. And to the new series featuring Mimi Tempestt, Janet Fitch, and Natalie Shapero. Let's give it up for them, please. My name is Jimmy Vega. I am the Associate Director of Beyond Baroque. I'd like to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting Indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. For those who don't know, Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' oldest literary arts center, located here in Venice, California, founded in 1968 by George Drury Smith, first as an experimental literary magazine before reimagining itself to the literary home we know it as today. We are based out of the original Venice City Hall and help support writers and help cultivate new writing through our extensive program of writing workshops, reading series, and performances. We offer a number of workshops online via Zoom, such as our free weekly Monday night fiction workshop facilitated by Raquel Baker, and our historic Wednesday night poetry workshop currently facilitated by Arthur Kazakian. Similarly, we offer several paid in-person online intensive workshops throughout the year. Next week, we'll feature Tony Barnstone and Bilal Shaw for learning how to write a ghazal from the American blues. And later this fall, we'll feature a special critique workshop with Dorian Locks and Kim Adonisio, with a handful of other workshops slated throughout the rest of the year. Aside from our workshops, we also offer several readings throughout the year. Next week, we'll feature a special night of ghazals in preparation for our workshop happening the next day, along with the book launch for Paul Evangelisti's new book, Just in Time. Paul will be accompanied by Robin's Nest Quintet, so it'll be a little afternoon of poetry and jazz, so please come back for that and more. And for more information on all of this, please do check out our website at beyondbaroque.org and on our socials at BBLitArts. We also offer several memberships to Beyond Baroque, starting at $60 for an individual membership. Purchasing a membership allows us to continue to offer these programs here for free. You'll notice that we didn't charge you for anything, but if you are so inclined, please do talk to our bookstore clerks to become a member. Your support really advances everything that we're trying to do here at the center. And on November 2nd, we will be featuring our annual fundraiser, the Beyond Gala, over at Playa Studios, in Culver City. So we're super excited to be gathering and celebrating our honorees, Sheshu Foster, Ashaki Jackson, Douglas Messerly, and Exene and John Doe of the punk band X, who actually met at Beyond Baroque's Wednesday night poetry workshop. So it's going to be a really special night. They're going to conclude the night with a special performance, and this is also their farewell tour, so they're like at the cusp of kind of hanging up their guitars, if you will. So if you do want to be there that night, please do come talk to us, inquire about getting tickets. If you have ways to support the center by becoming a sponsor or purchasing an ad, or if you know someone that can help us reach our historic goal, that'll go a long way. And thank you to all of our members who are in the audience tonight as well. So the new series invites established authors from Los Angeles and beyond to create new art, new writing commissioned by Beyond Baroque. So what you'll see here tonight is completely commissioned by Beyond Baroque. We hand-selected these authors, hand-selected these authors, and what they're reading and sharing with us tonight is, again, wholly original and have never been performed elsewhere. So we're really looking forward to that. Tonight, each of our three authors were given a prompt, and they're supposed to respond to the prompt, Querencia. So we're looking forward to seeing how they played, how they experimented with the prompt, and our DJ Eddie, actually, for the night. Let's give it up for DJ Eddie. They similarly created a hand selection of tunes for the night, also following the same prompt, Querencia. So we want to thank DJ Eddie. We want to thank the NEA for funding this project. A big thank you to all of our staff, Quentin Ring, Ivan Salinas, Genesis Perez, Eric Alberg, Nick Foreman, Tyler Newfield, and everyone else at Beyond Baroque for making tonight happen and for all that you do. And I think that's it. So let's get into the readings. We have three, like I said, fantastic authors that will present their work, their new work, in the theme of Querencia. So first up, we have Natalie Shapero. Natalie Shapero's writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, The London Review of Books, The New York Review of Books, The Paris Review, The Nation, and elsewhere. She is the author of the poetry collections Popular Longing, Hard Child, and No Object, and she has performed at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, the Poetry Project at St. Mark's, and elsewhere. She lives in Los Angeles and teaches writing at UC Irvine. Please make some noise for Natalie Shapero.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone at Beyond Baroque for making this night possible and for having me here. And I'm very honored to be reading here tonight and to be reading with two other writers who I admire very much. So yeah, it's really nice to be here. I'm going to read a poem called One Point of Life. 1. I gave my heart and soul to you, girl. Oh, didn't I do it, baby? Didn't I do it, baby? Gave you the love you never knew, girl. Oh, didn't I do it, baby? Didn't I do it, baby? Guess what? I want to live. I want to live are just some of the lyrics to Neil Young's Heart of Gold, the number 17 song of 1972. I have some questions about that song, specifically whether it might have served as the unofficial soundtrack to the space strike of December 28, 1973. This was the day that the 3-person crew of the NASA mission known as Skylab 4, having spent at that point a month and a half tearing through outer space at 17,500 miles per hour, suddenly switched off all radio communications with ground control, becoming unreachable for one full day. They did this because they wanted something they'd had on Earth, and they were dearly missing in outer space. It wasn't the feel of their feet in the dirt or the sound of the rain on the roof. What they wanted was a weekend. They hadn't been given a weekend. They hadn't been afforded by ground control any time and space in which they were able to exist as some manner of private and self-determined people. So the 3 astronauts agreed among themselves to schedule an otherwise unscheduled day off, powering down the communication system and initiating what is widely considered to be the first and only labor strike to take place in outer space. 2. Accounts of the space strike of 1973 almost all include the following information. The members of the crew, upon ceasing work, distributed themselves among the various areas of the ship, including sectors known as the wardroom and the dome. Both the wardroom and the dome featured massive windows, and the astronauts spent the strike day examining the open face of the Earth and floating and listening to music. So okay, here's my question. What was the song? It is clear from accounts of this mission and from records of previous Skylab excursions that astronauts in the early 1970s were sent into space equipped with individual portable cassette players. These cassette players featured a series of Velcro strips glued to one side. The interior walls of the space station were lined with corresponding strips of Velcro, allowing the player to be secured on the wall and so stabilized within the zero-gravity environment. Anecdotal reports of the in-space music collections of astronauts of the 1970s suggest a strong preference for pop. 3. I want to live. I want to live. I want to imagine the astronauts spending the strike day vibing to Neil Young's Heart of Gold. But I have to be realistic. There are so many other contenders. A study of charts from 1970 to 1973 reveals the myriad possibilities. For example, it seems not unreasonable that a person achieving their lifelong dream, or at least career-long dream, of space travel might have wanted to hear the number 88 top song of 1970. Let's go up the ladder to the roof. In the alternative, maybe the act of silent and solitary staring at the Earth in its state of unfathomable farness made it the perfect occasion to blast the number 12 song of 1971. I'm so tired of being alone. Or maybe, knowing as they did that the strike was somewhat perfunctory, knowing that the strike would need to end almost as soon as it began, whether or not their demands were met, as they were inextricably intertwined with mission control, and in fact depended on Houston not only for their livelihoods, but for their very lives. During both the core of the mission and through the process of descent, maybe their anticipation of the inevitable reopening of the channel of communication, coupled with a profound awareness of how removed they were from the meteorological phenomena that had, on Earth, structured their lives into seasons, maybe that made it the ideal day to hear the number 16 song of 1971. Winter, spring, summer, fall, all you gotta do is call. 4. The number 97 hit song of 1973, just barely squeaking onto the charts. Ground control to Major Tom. Major Tom might have slipped away, but the real-life astronauts that year achieved success. The strategy of powering down the communication systems worked. NASA had to exceed. The crew of Skylab 4 received their requested workload reduction, more time off, more time for themselves. Their mission was complete, but the legacy going forward remained unclear. The memoir of the contemporary astronaut Scott Kelly, who several years ago achieved the distinction of being the U.S. astronaut with the most consecutive days in space on record. Yes, they say on record, as though it were possible for an astronaut to slip into space unnoticed and stay there for longer than anyone else. Does not mention Skylab 4. And in fact, the events in Kelly's book unfold as though Skylab 4 never even happened. Kelly's book presents the outer space weekend as a fiction. He employs the military metaphor of mission creep to describe how working time invades and conquers time for leisure. During the week, the astronauts of the International Space Station have nearly every minute blocked out for them in a rigorous schedule articulated in a platform called the Onboard Short-Term Plan Viewer. The only downtime is a brief window at the end of the day, referred to as pre-sleep. 5. The number 29 hit song of 1972. Before you do anything rash, dig this. Everybody plays the fool sometimes, no exception to the rule. Listen, baby, they never tell you so in school. I ain't lying, everybody plays the fool. Tasks during working hours on the International Space Station include maintaining the station's mechanical components, various variants of cleaning, managing the complex process of connecting and unloading resupply rockets, trying to make a flower grow in the absence of ordinary conditions for growth, using a sort of kinky protocol where they can't touch it with their bare hands, preparing for the ever-present possibility of one of the astronauts being electrocuted. Preparation takes the form of defibrillation drills that involve injecting a medication directly into the shin bone, and representing the space program in a public relations sort of way that involves live video interviews with local TV news stations in which the astronauts, among other things, turn somersaults on cue. The astronauts themselves are also experiments, and so just the fact of having a human body is itself a kind of work. I want to live. I want to live. That is one point of life on the International Space Station, to determine how the human body fares away from this planet for long runs of time. Being an experiment of this sort requires committing to hours upon hours per day of physical exertion to combat the severe health risks of spending extensive time without gravity. It is not possible to take a break from this. As Kelly puts it, the damage to our bodies done by weightlessness does not observe weekends. 6. The damage to our bodies done by weightlessness does not observe weekends. Astronauts are on the clock even when they are sleeping. Kelly has mentioned that after dreaming, he is supposed to be remembering his dreams and writing them down for fans on Earth who want to know what it's like when you dream in space. And then there is eating. Though the quarters in which the crew exists are cramped and finite, they're so busy that they're only able to gather for a communal meal once per week, dinner on Fridays. The other evenings, they eat on their own, downing packets of irradiated meat in between micro jobs. They are often tasked with assignments opaque to them, intermittently pressing buttons to execute experiments which have been designed by biologists on the ground and which there is scant information about on the station. This combination of incessant busyness and incessant boredom will perhaps be recognizable to anyone familiar with working conditions in many contemporary processing and packaging plants. In call centers, in retail stores, in grocery services, in ride-hailing operations, in other manifestations of an economy increasingly geared toward customer convenience, instant gratification, the fantasy of personalization, the fantasy of frictionless exchange, the general privatization of services and goods. The number 8 hit song of 1971, Country Roads, Take Me Home. 7. Kelly's travelogue, while cheerful and even folksy in tone, returns again and again to the following themes, which happen to coincide with the conditions of much of contemporary low-wage work. 1. Toxic atmosphere. As when he describes life on the International Space Station as being a state of constant off-gassing, with plastic particles a component of every drawn breath, and the carbon monoxide levels dangerously high for any human person, but maybe even especially dangerously high for a human person charged with making a life or death decision while operating giant machinery. 2. Institutional disregard for the safety of workers and unwillingness to implement costly institutional disregard for the safety of workers and willingness to implement costly safety measures only after disaster occurs, and only in a manner proportionate to public relations pressure. As when Kelly muses that to be inside a space shuttle is to be surrounded by the evidence of tragedies and too late fixes. 3. Constant surveillance, as when Kelly notes that much of their onboard interactions are monitored by mission control and sometimes even beamed instantaneously onto a publicly accessible network called NASA TV, which means that their conversations at work are seldom private, and also that they have to engage in self-policing of their vocabularies so as not to commit an FCC violation by swearing on TV. 4. Employer monitoring of employee health and biometrics. 5. Repetitive movements that have a lasting impact on the body. Sensation of putting down a fork at dinner table, looking for a proper dot of Velcro. 6. Other negative health effects of the job that remain in the body long after the work itself has concluded, as when Kelly describes the long-term vision loss suffered by astronauts and the increased cancer risk attributable to high radiation exposure. 7. Generalized constant low-level bodily discomfort, as when he describes the odd distribution of blood through the body that happens in space. It's like a months-long feeling of standing on his head. 8. Generalized constant low-level uncertainty and fear about the future, as when Kelly notes that the fresh vegetables sent up on resupply rockets rot more quickly in space than they do on Earth, which leaves him wondering whether the human body is similarly affected. 9. The inability to escape noise. 10. The inability to take as-needed bathroom breaks. 11. The inability to take time off from work if a loved one endures an emergency or if a loved one dies, and the constant necessity of delegating intimate tasks, such as the placing of flowers on a loved one's grave in observance of the anniversary of a death. Scott Kelly did have to delegate flower placing on his mother's grave to someone else. 8. But of course, in spite of all of these consonances with low-wage work, Scott Kelly is not a low-wage worker. He is, by contrast, in a job that is considered by many to be among the most highly skilled, prestigious, glamorous, and exciting professions there is. He is an astronaut. At the same time as Kelly released his memoir, titled Endurance, in tribute to Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton's ship of the same name, he also released a picture book for children about his year in space, this one titled My Journey to the Stars. The title underscores how his actual life is the literal manifestation of the most common metaphor for achieving one's dreams. Both books dramatize Kelly's astronaut origin story as one in which he was drawn not necessarily to the idea of space, but instead just to the sheer idea of challenge, of doing something immensely difficult, risking it all, going far, surviving. The number 45 hit song of 1972. Good morning, America, how are you? Oh, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. Kelly's story is not a story of travel or discovery, as is the case with many earlier narratives of toil and triumph in the space program. After everything they've done to get there, rigorous training, including an activity in which a flight simulator falls into water and the astronaut within has to escape, sometimes blindfolded, astronauts descend on the ISS not to go anywhere, not to see anything, but simply to work. What's exciting about this mission, according to the book, what's laudable and worthy of glamorizing, is not the journey, but the survival. That it didn't kill him, that he didn't die. 9. And so it is possible to think back to the astronauts of Skylab 4 with their small 1970s cassette players velcroed to the wall, orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour, convening in the center of the ship for a meeting beneath a posted joke sign that is also a true sign reading, "Speed limit, 17,500 miles per hour." Seeing a sunset and a sunrise every 90 minutes, another 45 minutes, another sunrise, another 45 minutes, another sunset, it is possible to think back to them and wonder if they spent that single strike day silent in the wardroom, gazing down at the ubiquitously feminized blue planet that birthed them into the nowhere they were living and cranking up the volume on the number 71 hit song of 1970. Oh, didn't I do it, baby? Didn't I do it, baby? 10. I don't know. I don't know the specific details of how they spent that December day at Skylab, that run of hours, and really no one does know but the three of them. But one thing that emerges in the middle of all of these narratives of toil and the slow destruction of the body in space, I want to live, is the intimacy among crew members. They are each other's confidants and bunkmates, chefs and paramedics. They perform medical procedures on one another. They cut each other's hair. Kelly says of his crewmates that each is a surrogate for all of humanity, and later says, "The people in the space station are the whole of humanity for me now." The functions of private relationships are displaced onto the sphere of employment and productivity. The workers are separated from all relationships not mediated by work and not characterized by their shared status as employees. 294 miles away from almost every single living creature in the world. I wanna live, I wanna give. I'm a miner for a heart of gold. It's these expressions I never give. Keep me searching for a heart of gold. And I'm getting old. Thank you.
Natalie Shapero, folks. Let's give it up one more time. Thank you so much for that, Natalie. Up next, we have Janet Fitch, who is an American author and teacher of fiction writing. She is the author of the #1 bestseller, White Oleander. Yes, a novel translated into 24 languages, an Oprah book club, and the basis of a feature film, Paint It Black. Also widely translated and made into a 2017 film. And her epic novels of the Russian Revolution, the Revolution of Marina M., and Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. She taught creative writing for 14 years in the USC Master of Professional Writing program, as well as VCFA's Writing and Publishing program. A room of her own, the UCLA Writers Program, and Pomona College. She lectures frequently on fiction writing. We are really happy to have her back here in the space. Please welcome Janet Fitch.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Boy, the auditorium looks great. So so this is a story off of the prompt Querencia that I call Haven. James Thomas left his briefcase on the little cabinet by the door, carried his bag of groceries into the kitchen, shuffled through his mail. Spring made him melancholy. He'd lingered in Washington Square after class, the warmth of the day curling around the spring daffodils, the trees bursting with bloom. April is the cruelest month, though it was March. He thought to buy some sprigs of flowering cherry at the corner deli, decided against it. Buying them for himself would be too depressing. Chloe had brought sprigs of flowering cherry into the apartment before he'd ever met her, placing them in a vase she found under the kitchen sink, left there by God knew who. He sifted through the mail, junk, causes he'd donated to over the years, causes he'd never donated to. Oil change for a car he didn't have. Statement from his credit union, his 401k. With Social Security, he is pretty comfortable. His apartment, though small, 450 square feet, was rent-controlled, the envy of professors who had to commute in from New Jersey. His safe space. The apartment's high ceilings accommodated the tall bookcases, crammed with volumes he'd collected over the years. The top two shelves dedicated to his own books in various translations, The Long-Legged Bait, Danger and Desire in the Work of Dylan Thomas, Magnificent Vision, Yeats, Myth and Legend. Flowers from the street trees dabbed the drab brick of the building opposite. Another spring, another year, another set of young faces, indifferent mostly to the mysteries of Villanelle, the brotherhood of the metric foot. At least the plague was over, he reminded himself, those long, anxious months of lonely imprisonment, waiting for a vaccine, when half the building emptied out to weekend cottages in the Berkshires or parents' capacious houses in distant states. But he had nowhere to flee. This was his corner of the world, Querencia, the Spanish called it, where the bull retreated to in the bull ring to regather his energy. He'd lived in this building 30 years. The lockdown had been hell, online teaching, something he'd resisted like death itself, the university always trying to save money on physical plant. But there was no choice. His apartment became a studio. It was his apartment. He should be able to be unsightly, if he cared to, without students posting about his hat rack and his taxidermied owl, Harold. He washed his hands. That habit had stuck, washing as soon as he came home, though he no longer sang happy birthday under his breath, and began putting his groceries away, quart of milk, quart of orange juice, chicken breasts, green beans, small potatoes, his favorite blue cheese, fig jam, water crackers, underscoring his small needs, his fuzziness. He poured himself a gin. He'd forgotten the tonic. Ice then, bit of soda, then some lemon. Happy birthday. Before he'd even met her, she always left something after cleaning the apartment, like a pyramid of plums, a pencil in Harold's beak, something for him to notice. At first he hadn't even known it was Chloe. She was just the cleaner. His apartment was small, but had accumulated a layer of dust that aggravated his hay fever. When he published the Dylan Thomas book, he gave himself a treat, having someone come in and clean. He was no good at it. She was someone the building super recommended. She cleaned for several other people in the building. A dancer, the super said. Modern dance. He liked that she was a dancer, that he would be helping an artist, not just exploiting the working class. They had arranged to meet so he could show her what to do, but that morning he'd had to leave her a check instead, an afternoon meeting with a student, very unpleasant. He left a key and instructions not to disturb anything on his desk. The books dusted, close the book tight, then wipe away from the spine. What a wonderful feeling to come home to a fresh apartment, the bed made, the sink sparkling, the bathroom floor spotless, or as spotless as it could be, considering its age and condition. It gave him such pleasure every other Tuesday, as he was teaching his poetry survey class, to know there was a woman in his apartment, wiping, sweeping, sweetening it. He hurried home to enjoy the piney smell of the products she used, eager to see what she might have left him. Always a small gift, a sprig of red berries on a branch, a palmier pastry, a blue glass evil eye amulet, a Cracker Jack toy. The semester ended, and he was home working when he heard the scrabble of the key in the lock. It embarrassed him to be caught at home. He didn't want her to see the person who made the mess she cleaned up every other Tuesday. The body, slender but not particularly fit, that slept in the bed whose sheets she changed and left the hairs in the bathtub, the stubble in the sink. A lovely young woman with black hair and blue eyes, her hair in a messy bun thing, in a plaid coat with her bags of cleaning potions, stood in the doorway, as surprised to see him as he was to see her. "Hey," she said, "Mr. Thomas, I'm Chloe." She was young, but not undergrad young. He guessed her to be in her late 20s. It had been a while since he'd had a girlfriend, though he had been married early on in Berkeley during his Maoist period. The people got married, and he wanted to be one with the people. It was a terrible reason to get married. He was 41 the year the Dylan Thomas book sold, but a young 41. He never lost his boyish looks. And she was so neat and graceful as she moved around his 450 square feet, stacking dishes and things in the sink, putting spices away. It struck him she knew where everything belonged. It was strange and exciting, and he had a weird thought as he closed the door behind him to give her room to work. What if she lived here? Now, 30 years later, he leaned back against his refrigerator, dislodging some of the magnets, his eyes closed. So many years ago, he'd made his choice. You make your choice, and then you lived with it. He turned on his stereo, Bill Evans' Evanescence, sat down heavily on the sagging couch, sipping his gin, remembering the day they'd first met. He'd returned after the requisite number of hours to find her just finishing up. Invited her out to an early dinner at the French place around the corner. She was embarrassed at wearing her cleaning clothes to a restaurant, but she was stylish no matter what she wore, jeans, a sort of baggy sweater. She was smart and funny. Why had that been a surprise? Because she cleaned? Because she was a dancer? But this was New York. Even smart people had to make rent, real estate being what it was. He'd just gotten lucky falling into this apartment. It wasn't luck, remember? No, it wasn't. The truth was it was a deal with the devil. He'd had a student, Danny Finke, a very ordinary student, so annoying, so entitled, had the nerve to come to him and ask for an A. Didn't like his courtesy C. He was going to graduate school. He couldn't have a C on his record. He was a senior, all ready to go, a done deal. The only thing standing in his way was Professor Thomas. He hated having to interact with students outside of class. It never went well, especially when it was about grades. The grade inflation at the university killed him. He fought it for a couple of years early on, but in the end had to bow to it like everyone else. He didn't even want to be in the same room with Finke. Then the shoe dropped. It seemed that the Finke parents owned several buildings in the area. And if the esteemed professor of English would see to it that young Finke received an A in 20th century American Lit, he would secure said professor a rent-controlled apartment, a studio, but still, in the Village, $5.50 a month, Washington Square. A bribe. He'd never been so appalled by a request. While the insulted professor in him railed and resisted, huffed and puffed, another small hidden part of himself, that part that had looked for months, unable to find anything but that shitbag, roach-infested apartment where he was living in Alphabet City, which only got water half the time, was saying, wait a second, your whole future could be improved, and who would be hurt? Who would be hurt? Everything. It would cheapen everything he'd done, the university, the very idea of fairness. It was the most terrifying, shameful thing he'd ever done. He, who reported every dime he made, tipped 25%, who signed petitions and walked out for adjunct unionization, when he gave Finke his A and received the keys to the apartment on 4th Street, 450 square feet of security for life. Since that year, he'd watched the rents around him climb. At first, he'd been terrified that someone would find out, that Finke would shoot his mouth off and would get back to the university. But he never told. Why would I? I'd be fucking myself. James Madison Thomas had made his deal with the devil, and the devil held up his end until Chloe. He was crazy about her. They went out to foreign movies, to dance concerts, exhibitions. He had a modest amount of disposable income. It was a long way back to Bushwick, where she lived with 2 other dancers and a Siberian husky. James didn't like dogs. It was so much better when Chloe stayed over with him, reading, listening to music, talking about some dance piece she was preparing, doing bar exercises against the kitchen counter, talking about the other people she cleaned for, their hidden habits, illustrating their quirks with cheeky imitations. It was full-on spring when he invited her to move in. The pleasure of sitting up in bed together reading, making love on Sunday mornings, then doing the crossword together, their legs intertwined. He loved the way she found treasures in the street. She hung twinkle lights over the bed. The scent of her everywhere, the suppleness of her body, the music of her laughter. But there was also the tiny bathroom, all that makeup on the lip of the sink, the shrieking whine of her hairdryer, trying to work while she talked on the phone, tripping over her dance bag, her boots, the damp leotards hanging over the bathroom rail, her late hours, her boisterous friends. He needed privacy. He needed to work. Sometimes he needed to just come home and not be observed. After enduring a 2-hour conversation with her sister in St. Louis one night, something snapped. This isn't working, he said. This place just isn't big enough for 2 people. She shrugged. We could move. His apartment? His Querencia? He had given up so much for this place, more than she could ever imagine. How could he walk away? I live here, he said. There are other places, Jimmy. Plenty of places. Brooklyn, Long Island, Bushwick, Queens. Maybe somewhere with a little yard. We could get a dog. She smiled, put her arm around him as they sat together on the bed. A small dog. We could make it work. Could they? Could there be other Querencias? In the arms of this exquisite young woman, loving, boisterous, taking up space, as she should, as she had every right to. For a moment, he saw a different future, a different James Thomas, Jim Thomas. Jim Thomas stepping out on a cool, bright morning somewhere else, a house with a porch, clean air filling his lungs, briefcase tucked under his arm. But he knew there were no other places, no other rent-controlled apartments 4 blocks from the university, no Jim Thomas, only him and this 450 square feet. Ah, the devil knew what he was doing. That damn Danny Finke. When you made a deal with the devil, it stayed done. He didn't know where she went. Weeping, she packed her bags, and a friend came to carry her away. Had she gone to Queens, to Long Island? She was in her 50s now. Maybe she was living in New Jersey with kids already teenagers, a husband, a dog, a 3-bedroom house on half an acre, wiping the counter with that piney smell. Maybe she was still in town, in her own place, in Brooklyn. Maybe she was lucky, too. Maybe she didn't love him at all. Maybe she just liked the apartment. Location, location. He put some water for the potatoes, chopped up some onion, wondering how many people in this city were living in apartments they would not give up. How many other old, stupid son of a bitches made their choice and were living with it. All over New York, they were making the best of it with their blue cheese and fig jam. Lucky to have a space to call their own. Too lucky to ever try anything else. So lucky. If he'd still been living in that fucking apartment, Alphabet City apartment, he wouldn't have hesitated moving with Chloe to Brooklyn or anywhere. Montana, Wyoming. That is the truth. He'd have followed her anywhere. There were other jobs in other places. He had no tenure, only pride. He could have taught high school, English, in Burlington or junior college in Raleigh. They might have made it. He might have been happy. But she might have dumped him anyway, and he would have been out a sweet deal. And cursed himself for the rest of his life for letting the apartment go. For a woman. For love. Because love didn't last. Everybody knew that. Dylan Thomas knew that. But a rent-controlled apartment in Manhattan was forever.
Janet Fitch, everyone. Please give it up. It's so good to have you back here with us, Janet. Before I bring up the next author, I do want to let everyone know that Anonymous Stellar Ravines, our current exhibition, is upstairs in our Mike Kelly Gallery, so I invite you all to check that out. One of the artists, Byron Baker, was here earlier today. I'm not too sure if he's here still, but if he is, I think I hear him now. He'd love to talk to you about the work, so yeah, please go check it out upstairs after the reading. Last but certainly not least, Mimi Tempestt is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and daughter of California. She has an MA in literature from Mills College and is currently a doctoral candidate in the Creative Critical PhD in Literature at UC Santa Cruz. Her first book, The Monumental Misrememberings, was published with Co-Conspirator Press and the Feminist Center for Creative Work. She was selected for participation in the Lambda Literary Writers Retreat for Emerging LGBTQ Voices and Writers in 2021. Her second book, The Delicacy of Embracing Spirals, was published with City Lights. Her work has been found in Fog Lifter, Interim Poetics, the Brooklyn Rail, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. We're going to have a little bit of a projection, so we are going to bring down our screen in a second, but please make some noise for Mimi Tempestt.
Wow. I don't think I would give up my beautiful apartment for a man either. So I love the idea. Yes, please. I have this weird visual that I created to go along with my piece. And the dress goes with my piece as well, so bear with us. Yes. Can you give a round of applause for Eric, please? This is called 33 Swan Year. As soon as it starts, I'll get going, whatever. My body is a gun. I own my beauty and yours too. I own this city. I own these roads, these freeways, these streets, this theater. And when I walk into any room, there is a sign over my head. It reads, "Devilish woman with the looks of a debutante and an attitude of a queen." The other day, I told my aunt, people love divas, but they hate bitches. She nervously laughed at my declaration. My body is the nervousness that signals to the world that very difference. Corset cunt, frill and frou-frou, a whiff of enchanté. I was forced to study the magazines for muses to become one myself. I am a poor girl's dream, a wealthy woman's pity, a spectacle of character. Remember, they banished Lilith from the Garden of Eden because she wanted to ride on top. I always preferred a higher view. My body is dangerous. At the gynecologist's office, on a scale, according to my next door neighbor, in a classroom as both student and professor, at a party, driving through LA when I was fat, now that I am skinny, because I couldn't make you come, because all you see me for is your pleasure, because all I care about is my pleasure, in front of a camera, at the conference amongst white women, because I was taller than most children, when my breasts were bigger, on the bus at 16, in front of older men, pulled over by a police officer, because I was ghetto, because I wasn't Mexican enough, when I was angry at you, because I told you about yourself, because I was too cocky, because I was your mirror and your reminder, because I don't believe in being humble, because I was too loud, because I was silent and didn't care enough, because your acceptance means nothing to me, because I don't wear a mask, because I didn't perform, because I don't perform, because I don't perform, because I don't perform, because I'm not performing. 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 My body is a world, a cosmos of cycles circling preordained and primordial destinations of DNA. Every month it silently showcases its revolution in 4 stages while being led by the rhythms of the moon. Menstruation. Fuck! Follicular phase. Fuck you! Ovulation. Fuck me. Luteal phase. Fuck this. Fuck this. And my body, it's never mine. It's on a canvas of histories, and painted on me are many names, many shades, many wins, many losses, many defeats and upsets, but it rings loud and clear for others to know that my essence is part of a larger hive of women who all walk individually in their own power. I'm Sarah Bartman, their distortion of Venus, an anthropological sideshow freak paraded around Europe during the 19th century. The first famously known human sex trafficking victim in modern history, dismembered, my corpse showcased in their museums until 1985. I am Josephine Baker, their exaltation of Venus, The segregation of my country led me to the fetishization of another, a topless siren, banana dancing into world-renowned acclaim and fame. Even after I returned home from Jim Crow to civil rights, I bore witness to an outcry of change. My life is an anomaly, a rarity of beauty, even though love never came. I am Henrietta Lacks. Immortality exists in me. A sample of my cancer cells were taken without my knowledge or consent. At 31, I died of cervical cancer with a husband and 5 children left behind. Multiplying indefinitely for the benefit of their scientifical advancements, my cells are used to this very day. I am Beyoncé. Fierce, perfect, gifted, aligned and trained with my divine purpose to sing, dance, and entertain them. I am secretive and capitalist driven. I am not above critique. With my first child, they started a rumor about the legitimacy of my pregnancy. And after she was born, they commented on the coarseness of her hair and the wideness of her nose, and now they wonder why I never want to speak to them again. I don't, unless I'm taking their money. I am a Scorpio moon. I am not above revenge too. I am Grace Jones, their truest Venus. I will never write my memoirs. I'll never be what you want me to be. I'll never sit down. I'll never shut up. I'll never be a woman. I'll never be a man. I'll never die. I'll never be a good church girl from Jamaica. I'll never be a white and ugly demure Parisian model. I'll never be beautiful. I'll never be ugly. I'll never be you. And you sure as hell don't have it in you to be me. I'll never be anything you can put your fingers on. Not one thing, but one thing is for sure. I will always be free. I am Sha'Carri Richardson, running through life, blessed by my footing, racing fast into their hearts with long, gorgeous nails, beautiful braids, and a champion smile. I am evidence of a journeys aligned to one's talent, with an unstoppable fire and ambition to prove everyone who doubted me wrong, to be both back and better, to be both a black woman and faster, to be both future and past, flying like Florence into a range of speed only to know time and space, to be both imperfect and human, learning from past mistakes and feeling the impact of true loss. I'll smoke them all and then some. I am Queen Nzinga. I'm a menace to their attempts to colonize my land and still my people for their Atlantic slave trade. History often remarks on the military genius of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great, but their antiquated strategies could never outshine my expertise in diplomacy. My father trained me to be a warrior and a leader. Being his rightful heir, I assassinated my brother to claim my throne. I keep a harem of men who I castrate and behead after they bed me. And when the Portuguese baptized me and named me Ana de Sousa, that was a racket to buy time and allies. While in front of their dignitaries to discuss a peace treaty, they didn't offer me a chair to sit. I fetched for one of my servants to fold himself on all fours, and I sat on his back and looked at those European men dead in their eyes. I am Morgan Parker. I am deliciously smart and funny and kind and nervous and nerdy and thoughtful and brilliant and outspoken and cool and beautiful and warm and unique. And there is a sadness in my laugh, but a glint in my eye as I talk about depression and anxiety. It's as if I know that the bravery of speaking openly and aloud about Black women's mental health will save your life too. I am Celia Cruz, la reina de salsa, pero legado de poder a través del rugido de mi voz. Mi vida como carnaval, un romántico, un cantante de guarachas, con gente, con danza, con una historia de azúcar y café, a través de la esclavitud, rosnado es mis huesos, con la resiliencia de la negrura. Mira cómo los hago regresa al alma. Vea cómo los conecto con las realidades de nuestras raíces. Primero con fuego. Recordarles con gracia lo inspirar que es existir como mujer afrocaribiana. No pueden extrañarme. Soy la madre de Cuba, que dio origen a una nación que siempre estuvo destinada a ser respetada, celebrada y vista. I am Marsha P. Johnson. I activate, I motivate, I smile wide, but ain't shit funny when it comes down to our liberation. I probably threw the first brick too. Lower than a dog. That's how homosexuality was described to me as a child. And also known as a tranny in drag or a high drag tranny, being a mother to this movement is the best thing known about me. They found my body floating in the Hudson River, but my legacy still floats on. I am Wanda Coleman, and this theater is named after me. Did you know that? Every corner you turn in any street in LA, you will see me. Down La Brea, I'm there. In Compton, I'm right there too. Hollywood was known as Wonderland at some point in time, and Broadway is a renaissance of me waiting to happen. They could never forget my name, my name. They could never slaughter my name, my name. They won't even slander my name, my name. 10 years dead, and the whispers of me still linger like a ghost wandering through these halls. Wanda, 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 Wanda. I am. We are. My body is a story. Where am I at? Yeah. I'm right on time. Chavez Ravine in the late 1940s was home to Zoot Suit gangsters, Jewish families, and a newly migrated Chinese who were trying to find a safe haven and begin new lives. Steep hills of grass, a lake in Elysian Park, and outlines of trees underneath the California sun. It consisted of 2 elementary schools, a neighborhood store, and the missionary church San Conrado, where Sunday masses were held. This was the new home to my great-grandparents, Jesse and Jenny Ceja, who trekked their way from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque, as the story was told, was Jesse's final stop in a series of trains that he hopped on to hobo from state to state after the Great War. In Albuquerque, he initially fell in love with Rafaela, but after finding out that she was already taken by another man, he settled for her sister Jenny. It is told that Jesse lost in a final battle against his drunkard stepfather, the stepfather who made a deal with the devil and sacrificed the lineage of every man in his family for generations to come until the deal was satisfied. The devil who led Uncle Peanut walking with his pants hanging at his ankles onto the 110 freeway headed north as he screamed at the top of his lung about a man who had been chasing him for weeks. Was he just shell-shocked from the war or simply schizophrenic? Or the same devil who my brother heard whistling behind his ear as he walked the tunnel underneath the same freeway towards our grandparents' house on a hot August night. No one really knows. But Chavez Ravine is where the devil followed Jesse, Jenny, and their daughters, Gloria and Concepcion, in 1946. Concepcion, my grandmother, was followed by Pete, Patsy, and Vivian. It's the first wave of Ceja children who would run and play in the streets of Casanova and Solano with the Tauruses and the Mongeses before land was purchased to bulldoze the community in half in 1949. A Los Angeles housing project eventually making way for the former Brooklyn Dodgers to showcase their colossus of a stadium in 1962. Loretta, Dolores, and Paul were the second wave of Cejas born after the stadium was built. Spoiled by Jenny and Jesse and too young to remember the abuses of years long past and Friday afternoons spent on the corner of Broadway and 7th. Jenny, with her young children, waited patiently for hours sometime to find Jesse after work, praying that he didn't blow his entire check on other women and liquor, wishing he had enough money to at least buy potatoes and tortillas for the hungry mouth she had to feed, hoping he would stay out long enough so she couldn't escape his open-hand slaps, backhanded threats, and whiskey-tinged breath. My grandmother doesn't say too much about growing up. Her sister Gloria was always sick and favored most by their mother. So at a young age, in an attempt to vie from her mother's love and attention, she took charge and unquestionably did whatever her mother asked her, a tradition that has lingered in my family longer than the devil himself. My grandmother was a senior at Lincoln High School around the time the second wave of Ceja babies were born. She worked at a furniture store to help pay for the new mouths to feed. And it is told every dollar of every check she earned from that job was given to her mother. One day she walked past the Macy's in downtown and saw a red polka dot dress that sat beautifully on the white mannequin of the department store. Mimi, it was blood red with tiny white pearl-colored polka dots. If you saw it today, you would have loved that dress. She begged her mother to keep just $15 from her next check to buy it, and Jenny adamantly refused. My grandmother cries when telling that story until this very day. Lincoln Heights is where my mother Ruth and her Uncle Paul used to race motorcycles up and down Broadway on the weekends. Wherever my mom went, she stood out. On the basketball court for the Lincoln High School Tigers is where writers from the LA Times would come and interview her after tallying up her game stats. Standing next to her cousin Suzanne, who often wore black tees and barely brushed her hair or her teeth, compared to my mother, who changed at least 3 times before going to school every day, she stood out especially at family functions, where she was often the only black person there. Her mother was seldom next to her, and despite not looking solely Mexican, she was more fluent in Spanish than all her cousins. This was in the 80s, when interracial children were frowned upon, and my mother, who was exceptional in high school, was still no exception for her mother's disgraced romp that occurred with a black man named Robert Harrell. A man who she didn't even keep in contact with after finding out she was pregnant. Robert refused to claim Ruth in 1969 when she was born. It is remembered that he later came knocking at Grandpa Jesse's door after reading about her in the papers. And Concepcion, who was no longer a Ceja, now married Miguel Aguilar, an immigrant from Colima, Mexico, had given up her parental rights and responsibilities of raising my mother to her next-door neighbor, Tia Fela, or Tia Rafaela. By the time my mother was 13, she was without both her parents, was being raised by her great aunt, and it is told she remembers seeing her mother leaving for vacations with her new family. Rumor has it that a month before my mother was born, Tia Fela had a nervous breakdown and tried to kill her own daughter, Annabelle, with a kitchen knife. Most of the women in the family assumed Tia Fela's breakdown was caused by the sadness of no longer having children to raise. All her children were well into their 20s and started their own families, or was it because of old age, or simply depression? No one really knows, but to cure her sadness, they let Rafaela watch my newborn mother when Concepcion. Imagine giving a newborn baby to a woman who just had a nervous breakdown. Anyways, I laugh at that part when they tell me that. No one really knows, but to cure her sadness, but they let Rafaela watch my mother, a newborn, when Concepcion left for work a week after giving birth. By the time my mother was 13, she was estranged from her mother, and although she witnessed her mother's family trail off on vacations without her from her bedroom window, she often felt and always felt connected to Tia Fela in a way that she never felt connected to her actual mother. Tia Fela was her true mother. Fela loved her and spoiled her. And despite the rest of the family making my mother the black sheep, she fought others if she even thought you looked or said something that was disrespectful about my mother, Ruth. It is told that when Ruth was 5, she had a full afro that was unkempt and wild. And one day, she was near a refrigerator when Patsy opened the milk and accidentally spilled a few droplets on her hair. And when the milk sat on top of my mother's tight curls and didn't dissolve, Patsy found this funny and laughed out loud. Thea Fella caught the entire moment and kicked Patsy's ass so bad that no one ever considered talking about my mother's hair aloud again. Even though I was really young, my mother said, those were the things that I remember. My Thea Fella didn't care if she was liked by anyone in our family or if they ever talked to her again. She didn't give a shit. I just always knew she loved me and protected me. And even after, and later on after I had you, when she was blind and had dementia, I would go visit at Annabelle's house. And when she heard my voice, she always knew it was me. My mother cries when telling that story unto this very day. My body is a home. Almost there. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. A year and a half ago, I weighed 333 pounds, 333. And it's a sin to be fat in this world. And people become this way for various reasons. But to be honest, it never bothered me much until it bothered me much. And in my mind and my heart and my soul, I was always beautiful. And I will always be beautiful, unlike others. I don't believe beauty is within the eye of the beholder. It's a frequency that unlocks itself when we choose, it's a frequency that unlocks within ourselves when we choose, let me see this time. Oh, and it's like a frequency. That's how I see it. It's a frequency that we see or that we feel that it unlocks itself. And we see time and time again, right? You know, someone who is phenotypically gorgeous, but something about them draws you away from them. And it could be a snide remark. It could be insecurities, how they change their mask in front of different people or play different to get over on others. And maybe it's even desperation. And there can be someone who is quote unquote ugly, but every man, woman, and child is drawn to them and would give their world for a second of their attention. And I get called out sometimes when I talk about beauty too openly. They confuse my fascination with it for vanity, and everyone loves to pretend like we aren't superficial or a visually driven society, but the truth is we are. And I personally wish we were sonically driven, you know, going back to this notion of frequencies, but that wasn't what we were given as an option. And the video I've chosen to play behind me is an outdated montage of past versions of myself for others to witness. I want everyone to tap into their own beauty. And I have no shame in once being fat. And I have no shame in now being skinny. And this poem should really be about Palestine or Black Indigenous liberation. But I have a practice or belief that in order to get to the larger and uglier truths about society, we must first address those things within ourselves. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. I love my older sister, Mecca. She is a beautiful person. But what makes her beautiful is how she loves is a direct reflection of how she loves herself. And she is kind, and she's thoughtful, and she's giving, and she is the most spiritually and magical person I know. And she always asks me for fashion advice, and when helping her decide which color she should wear or what top goes better with what pants, I always choose the option that I know will make her happy and feel most like herself. And beauty isn't always about looking good. It's about feeling the most you. Like feeling the most you are at that moment. And when anyone in my circle contemplates whether they should buy a certain piece or cut their hair or get a tattoo, they always ask my opinion first, and it's a task that I take with high honor. And my response is simple. You will never be this young or hot again in your life, and you might as well pursue the image of yourself that feels truest to the expression of your soul. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. At 13 years old, while at the dinner table with my entire family, my grandfather got up and walked to his room. I was a plump child. Dealing with my parents' separation and having to live with my grandparents was overwhelming. I always helped my grandmother with cooking. I was the oldest of 3 children, and my mother and I weren't getting along. And to self-soothe, I turned to food. My grandfather eventually returned to the table with an Elle magazine, and from my memory, Nicole Kidman was on the cover. Okay. She was blonde and blue-eyed, a darling of Hollywood. And he pointed to the magazine and in front of my entire family said, "Mija, don't you want to look like that? You can't look beautiful like her if you keep eating the way you do." And I never responded. And my mother and my grandmother said nothing either. I put my head down and I finished my plate of food. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. At 17, I became an avid collector of magazines: Elle, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Neon Magazine, Spin, and I would rip out the pages and staple my favorite fashion spreads on the walls. And I would read the language of literature and images spliced together through a beautiful dance. And I learned about Andre Leontelli and Grace Coddington and Grace Jones and Bianca Jagger and Catherine Baba and June Ambrose and my favorite it girl of all time, Charlemagne Roque. And I learned about all the fabulous muses from the 60s to the 90s, and I dreamt of glamour. I dreamt of punk. I dreamt of performance and drag. I dreamt of filmic hyperboles that stood the test of time. I dreamt of wealth. I dreamt of foreign vacations and high art. I was silently learning the skill of curation, though I didn't understand it at the time. And to this day, my favorite cover ever is of Jennifer Hudson on the cover of Vogue. It was the December issue in 2009, and she was slated to win the Oscar for her role as Effie White in Dreamgirls. And for the first time, I saw someone on the cover who looked like me. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. In my late teens and early 20s, I almost became a fashion stylist. All the girls and gays at FITM hated me because I was able to execute with ease what they paid thousands of dollars for to learn at school. I studied beauty because I valued beauty. And I valued beauty because it was the only thing that I could create fully with ease. And it was unique to me, and it was mine. I owned beauty. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. In my mid to late 20s, I found myself in the underground of Los Angeles. I would battle rap with the boys in Leimert Park, dance with the drag queens and the DJs in downtown and West Hollywood, smoke cigarettes with the black punks on weekdays and nights. As much fun as I thought I was having, I found myself at the bottom of the barrel every night, and I was a shell of myself, consumed by the thought of being something that wasn't me, searching for acceptance outside of myself, being loved by strangers, being hated by family. I landed on a party called Mustache Mondays, and my friends at the time tormented me about changing my stage name so that I could perform at this party. No one named Mia Boykin could perform or stand next to a diva or a singer or a drag queen in nightlife, not with that name. My name wasn't going to work, and we came up with Mimi Tempestt. Mimi, my nickname given to me by my grandmother on my mother's side. And Tempestt, my middle name given to me from my great-grandmother on my father's side. At first, Mimi was heaven. She was the girl I could never be. She was cool, she was witty, she was funny, she dressed however she liked, and she did it well. She stayed out late and she fought everyone who dared to challenge her, but she didn't care. She turned into a violent storm, and she didn't care about anyone's feelings. Caring took too much energy, too much thought, too much empathy and consideration for others. She was selfish and mean, and she drank away all the pain of growing up poor and growing with parents who fought all the time, and growing up feeling ignored, unseen, and growing up with aunties who nitpicked at her hair and her skin color and her natural talents and her awkward, studious way of being. They chipped away at her confidence for years, and she was an Aquarius moon. No one understood what isolation felt like, so Mimi had to prove them all wrong. And one morning in a motel in Eagle Rock, she found herself on one of the worst binges of her life. She was on day 3 without sleep and with a variation of some of the hardest drugs you could ever have in your system. And as she toiled and tossed on the bed, she finally looked up and found a mirror on the ceiling. And she was struck by the image. It wasn't a person she recognized, the deep sadness in the eyes, the rage pouring through the sweat of the skin. The body looked like death. It looked afraid and small. And in that moment, the voice of her mother always whispered on by. It was saying something that her mother often said when she was running. Wherever you go, there you are. Shortly after that day, Mimi packed up her things and she ran away to Oakland. My name is Mimi Tempestt, and this is my theory on beauty. I love the white dress that I'm wearing right now. It's silky, it's clean, and the puff at the bottom gives it an exaggerated air of drama. Can you believe that it only cost $25? I've been wearing pearls a lot lately because it has an accentuation of simplicity. I bought my jewelry from my favorite fat girl shop in Highland Park, and in total, I think these cost me like $6. Nothing on my body is designer, but how I wear everything is authentic. Pearls symbolize love, resilience, and wisdom, and white represents purity. Now, having lost over 130 pounds, I'm invested in purity. Not perfection and definitely not acceptance. At 33 years old, I've grown from an ugly duckling to a wholesome swan. Meaning, the journey of my body has brought me back to myself. I'm beautiful not because I look pretty. I embody beauty because I return over and over and over to my most purest self. And now I invite you to do the same. So I ask you, and I want to hear a few answers. What are some things about yourself that you know are beautiful? Let's call them out. Your beauty is transness. Thank you for letting me be a mirror. What are some other answers?
My smile.
Your smile. Thank you for being a mirror.
My voice.
Your voice. Thank you for allowing me to be your mirror. I want to hear a few more. Your dreams. Thank you for allowing me to be your mirror. Anything else?
My sneakers.
Your sneakers! What kind of sneakers are they?
Big ones.
Yes! Thank you for allowing me to be your mirror. Anyone want to close us out?
My heart.
Your heart and all of our hearts. Thank you for allowing me to be your mirror. Thank you.
Mimi Tempestt, folks, presente. Thank you, Mimi. And one more time for Natalie Shapero, Janet Fitch, Mimi Tempestt. We've got DJ Eddie spinning some tunes outside as well, so give it up for them. Thanks for being here on a Saturday night. Let's enjoy some reception and keep talking. Thanks, folks.